My wife told me our kids are American only and refused to let my son teach them our heritage. Now I'm stuck between protecting my kids' roots and saving my marriage. This summer is supposed to be the most important summer of my son's life, and probably the last one I'll have with him before everything changes. He's 17, just finished his junior year of high school, and he's laser-focused on securing an athletic scholarship. He's been training year-round, building toward this one chance to maybe get to college without putting us or himself in massive debt. I'm proud of him. Honestly, I'm in awe of him. My wife and I have 3 younger boys in the house. 2 of them are her kids from a previous relationship, but I legally adopted them years ago, and I love them like they're my own. Our 3rd child is biologically ours. My oldest son, though, is from a previous relationship of mine. His mom is not in the picture at all. I've been raising him solo since he was a toddler, and he was already a young boy when I met my wife. She's done a lot for him, and I'm grateful, but she's not his mother. This is important context because it's where a lot of the tension stems from. So yesterday, while my son was on his way out the door to the gym, something he's done every single day this summer, my wife asked him to tidy the living room. He responded that he was on the way to the gym and would take care of it when he got back. He didn't stop to argue, didn't raise his voice, just stated his plan and left. That was enough to send things spiraling. Apparently, she was fuming after he left. She texted him saying he was grounded. Then she called me at work to tell me about the disrespect. I told her I'd talk to him about it, but that I didn't consider this grounds for punishment, especially not being grounded. The word grounded in this house means canceled plans, no gym, no social life, basically a full lockdown. And I wasn't going to do that to him, not now, not this summer. She wasn't happy about that response. She told me I was undermining her and teaching the kids that they didn't have to respect her. I told her I wasn't dismissing her feelings. We could definitely talk to my son about how he handled the interaction, but a full-on grounding felt extreme. I wasn't about to derail his progress and momentum over something that could have been resolved with a conversation. Especially not when this summer, this one window, matters so much to his future. I texted my son, let him know he wasn't grounded, but we wanted to talk when he got home. He was understanding and texted us again when he left the gym. When he got home, we sat down and had a calm, mature conversation, at least from my perspective. He explained that he's happy to help around the house, but he's on a tight schedule. Between workouts, his part-time job, and summer training camps, he barely has a moment to breathe. He said he's fine helping with chores, but he needs a heads up. He can't be expected to be available at a moment's notice. I thought that was fair. Life is teaching him structure and time management, and this was a thoughtful, honest way to set a boundary. I told him that was reasonable. I asked him if he'd still be willing to clean the living room, and he said yes. He'd do it after a quick shower. It felt settled. Until my wife and I got into it while he was in the shower. She said I completely undermined her. That now, none of the kids will take her seriously. She felt I was showing favoritism to my son over our younger kids, and that I was modeling disrespect. I tried to explain, again, that this wasn't about dismissing her authority, but about balancing the reality of my son's situation with the discipline that's appropriate. She wouldn't hear it. Said I always take his side. That's when I said it. The thing that lit the fuse. You're not his mother. You never have been. Final say with him is mine. I regret how blunt that came out, but I don't regret the sentiment. It's true. I've raised that boy since he was 2. I've been the one making sacrifices for him, coaching him, supporting him through school and sports and heartbreak, and everything in between. She's been a stepmom, yes, and a good one in many ways. But that doesn't mean she gets unilateral say over his future or his summer. She was devastated. Said she needed space. Told me I made her feel like a stranger in her own home. That she tries so hard to parent fairly, and now she feels like her role is meaningless. I tried to soften things, told her that's not what I meant, that I appreciate everything she does, but she'd already shut down. We slept in separate rooms that night. She didn't say goodnight to me or my son. I spent that night staring at the ceiling wondering if I did the right thing. I keep coming back to this. This is my son's last summer before he becomes a man. My last summer to be part of his everyday. I want him to remember this time with pride. I want him to feel like I believed in him, that I had his back. And still, I hate that it came at the cost of hurting my wife.
She's right in a way.
Kids do notice when parents are divided. And I can imagine it didn't look great when I overturned her punishment like that. But at the same time, I don't think she fully understands how much this summer means for him. Or for me. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to be a good father and a good husband, and I don't know if I can be both in this situation. I don't want my marriage to suffer. I don't want my younger kids to feel like there are two sets of rules. But I also won't jeopardize my son's goals because someone was offended over a chore delay. We barely spoke all day. The atmosphere in the house was brittle, like the thinnest layer of glass covering a deep well of tension. I went through the motions, helping the kids get dressed, picking up around the kitchen, checking my phone every few minutes even though I wasn't expecting anything. Just trying to breathe around the silence. Memorial Day. We were supposed to be at a barbecue in an hour. Something casual, light, full of conversation and hot dogs and kids running through sprinklers. And then she asked me to stay home. She wanted to take the boys without me.
Just like that.
No fight. No yelling. Just the question.
Can you stay home?
It hit me harder than I expected. I felt the distance between us in that moment more than I ever had, even during arguments. I didn't argue. I just nodded. My oldest had already left to meet his friends, which meant I was going to be alone in the house, while everyone else went on as if nothing was wrong. The silence was deafening. And yes, I started to wonder, am I the asshole here? My son has always been respectful. He's never raised his voice at her, never cursed, never even so much as rolled his eyes in her direction when he thought I wasn't looking. He's made it clear, respectfully, that he doesn't view her as his mother. And we've all lived with that for years. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. But now, suddenly, she's treating him like one of our younger boys, expecting the same kind of obedience, the same kind of unquestioned authority. It's not that I think she's wrong for asking him to help. It's that the expectations were never clearly aligned, and the explosion over a minor disagreement felt like it came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere that had nothing to do with the living room. After the barbecue, when she got home with the boys, things were calmer, quiet. The kind of calm that feels more like exhaustion than peace. We put the kids to bed, said little things like, "Did he brush his teeth?" and "Don't forget to plug in the nightlight." And then, finally, we sat down. It wasn't a fight this time. Just words. Just trying to understand. I asked her what had changed. For 5 years, she'd never pushed to be a mother figure to my son. Never tried to discipline. Never insisted on being called mom. Never tried to wedge herself into a role that didn't feel natural to him. And then suddenly, this summer, something shifted. She told me it wasn't about mothering. That she was just trying to manage the household and needed help. That she was overwhelmed. She said she needed the living room done then, because otherwise it would hang over her head, and she just didn't have the mental space for it. I told her I got that. Really, I do. But he wasn't refusing to help. He said he would do it after the gym, and given how disciplined he's been with his training, I believe he would have. Her reaction to that, grounding him, cutting him off from something so important, felt disproportionate. Then I said what was really on my mind. That this summer matters more than anything. That it might be the last one I get to spend with my son before he goes off into a world where I don't get to see him every day. I said I was terrified that if this tension keeps building, he might start pulling away. That if he feels like coming home means conflict, he might just not. I rambled. I said that I was scared that if things don't get better, he might not invite us, or her, to his future. To his college games. His graduations. Maybe even his wedding one day. And that I didn't know what I would do in a situation where I was invited, but she wasn't. And then she smiled. It was like flipping a switch. One moment she was quiet and listening, the next she looked like someone had just told her the best news in the world. I stopped talking. "What?" I asked. "What's going on?" She just said, "Nothing." Then, after a pause, "Do you mean that?" I asked her what she was talking about. "Would you really choose me over him?" It took me a second to understand what she meant. Then she clarified, if he invited me somewhere and didn't want her there, would I go? Would I accept an invitation that excluded her? And I told her the truth. That I could never choose anything over my children. But that I also couldn't, as her husband, just abandon her either. I told her I wouldn't go if it meant hurting her deeply. That I couldn't, in good conscience, leave her behind unless it was some kind of emergency. And, obviously, I don't want any kind of emergency. But that's what kills me. This growing fear that my son might start closing doors. That the hurt or awkwardness in our home might follow us into the future. And that I'll be forced to choose. And that maybe I already did. Maybe that's what she heard in everything I said. Maybe that's why she smiled. She didn't say much else after that. Just that she was going to bed. I stayed up a while longer, sitting in the living room that caused all this, looking around and wondering how we got here. I don't know if I'm being a bad husband. I don't know if I'm failing to back my wife up, or if I'm protecting my son the way a father should. I just know that it's not as simple as who's right or wrong. She said she understood, and it wouldn't happen again, but the whole interaction was so strange. One moment she was upset and defensive. The next moment she was kissing me and telling me I was going to have a great summer, and everything would be okay. The whole thing was so odd. I asked her how the barbecue was, and she said it was all right, but it would have been better if I was there, which I had no idea how to respond to. Anyway, I'm typing this in the bathroom. I don't know what to make of this situation. Half of me thinks this is a resolution, and I can put it behind me, and maybe the other half is too paranoid from reading so many comments, but that half thinks this is just a symptom of a bigger problem. Either way, my wife is happy, so I'm better off than I was before, I suppose. The next day, I talked to my son today. I asked him if something had happened between the two of them prior to the above incident. I said I wasn't looking for someone to blame, just to figure out the reason for the sudden shift. He said there was one weird incident, but he didn't know if it was related and wasn't sure how I would react to hearing about it. Asked him to tell me and promised I wouldn't have a negative reaction. Here I have to provide context I didn't think was relevant in the original post, but turns out is. I'm going to give an overview that isn't detailed because there was a lot of sexist language in the comments of the first post, and I don't want to read any racial slurs. My ex-wife and I both grew up in bilingual homes as members of a minority culture, and when we got married our plan was to eventually move to our homeland once we were more stable financially. As I grew in my career, I felt less and less connected to our culture. I realized I didn't want to go anywhere. I like it in America. My ex did not. She held onto our roots tightly, and when our son was born, she immersed him in our language and customs from day one. I did too at first, but gradually, I faded. After the divorce, I stopped speaking our language at home entirely. My son never did. It stayed a part of him, even more than it stayed a part of me. My wife now, she never tried to learn our language. She always kind of bristled when I spoke it to him. It wasn't aggressive, just off. She once told me she felt excluded when we spoke in a language she didn't understand. I understood that. But I never asked him to stop. Back to what my son told me. He said a couple of weeks ago he was sitting at the kitchen table on the phone with his grandmother, my mother, speaking in our language. He said my wife came in, heard him talking, and asked him to take the call elsewhere. He said he asked why, and she said it made her uncomfortable not knowing what was being said in her house. He told her it was his grandmother, and he wasn't going to leave just because she was insecure. He said she dropped it then, but gave him a dirty look and didn't speak to him the rest of the day. That was the weird incident. He said it didn't escalate, and she didn't bring it up again. But a few days later, she started nitpicking him over little things, leaving dishes in the sink, not folding laundry right away, things she never really brought up before. Then the living room incident happened. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me was angry. Not just for my son, but at myself for not seeing this dynamic building. I've always tried to walk a delicate line, balancing being a father to my son and a husband to my wife. But maybe in trying to make everything smooth, I ignored some fault lines. That night, I brought it up with her. I told her what my son had said. She got defensive at first, said it wasn't about the language, it was about respect. But I reminded her he was speaking to his grandmother, not gossiping. I said I needed her to be honest with me. If she felt excluded or uncomfortable, I could work with that, but if she was acting out of resentment or control, we had a bigger problem. She teared up. Said she did feel like an outsider sometimes. Said she felt like no matter how much she did, she would never be part of that world with us. That she would never be his mom, and she was fine with that, but it also meant she would never be close to him either. I told her she didn't need to be his mom. She just needed to be an adult in his life who treated him with respect and compassion. That would be enough. When my father died, it broke something in me I hadn't fully processed until much later. That house he left me, it wasn't just property. It was a piece of him, and in a way, a piece of who I used to be. My ex saw it differently. To her, my father's passing marked the perfect transition point. Sell the house, use the money, start fresh overseas like we always planned. But by then I knew I couldn't go through with it. America had become home in a way that surprised even me. I had roots here. A life, and more importantly, a son who is already navigating a life with too many uprooted parts. I said no, and that's how the marriage ended. 4 years later, I met my current wife. By then, I had fully distanced myself from the community I grew up in. I wasn't attending cultural events, wasn't speaking the language unless it was with my son or my mother. My wife never had to contend with that part of me in any meaningful way. She knew it was there, but it wasn't active. It wasn't in her face. So when my son told me about that incident with our 4-year-old, how he was just sitting there, teaching his little brother a few words in our language, and how my wife silently walked over, took the 4-year-old by the hand, and led him out of the room without saying a single word, I was stunned. The way he described it, her face had been stony. Angry. Not confused, not curious, just cold. He said she didn't say anything to him then or later. Just took the kid and walked off. It didn't fully click at first. I had trouble connecting that moment to everything else going on. But then he told me about the earlier moment, how he was on the phone with my mother, speaking in our language, and my wife asked him to take the call elsewhere. When he said it was his grandma and he wasn't going to move just because she felt insecure, she gave him a look like he'd slapped her. Didn't say a word to him the rest of the day. That chilled me. It explained a lot of the tension that had seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The nitpicking. The sudden rigidness about chores. The fight about the living room. It wasn't just about control, it was about resentment. About her feeling like there was a part of this household, of this family, that she couldn't access. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house had gone quiet, I sat down with her and asked directly, "Why did it bother you so much?" Him speaking the language. Teaching it to his little brother. She stared at me for a long time.
Didn't speak.
Then she said, in the quietest voice, I never agreed to marry a slur for my background, and I didn't expect to raise one. That hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just prejudice, it was regret. It was disillusionment. She wasn't just frustrated, she was angry that our family wasn't what she thought it would be. She went on. Said when she saw our son using the language with his little brother, she panicked. Said she was afraid our youngest would grow up confused, thinking he was one of them, just because his older brother was. That it would mess with his identity. That it was unfair. I asked her, what's unfair about learning a few words of another language? Of knowing a bit more about where his grandparents came from? That's part of who he is too, whether you like it or not. She didn't answer. Just sat there blinking at me like she was trying to process what I'd said. I added, you know he probably won't remember the words. But even if he does, that's not a bad thing. It's a connection, not a transformation. He's not going to forget who you are because he knows how to say a few things in a different language. She finally said, but what if I do? That got me. She wasn't talking about the language anymore. She was talking about feeling like an outsider. About not being part of the narrative. About seeing herself as temporary while my son and I shared something ancient. I told her I understood. That I wasn't trying to shut her out. But I also wasn't going to erase who my son is to make things neater for her. That boy grew up with a culture. He clung to it when I let it go. It means something to him. And I won't let anyone, not even my wife, make him feel like that's something to be ashamed of. She cried a little then. Said she wasn't trying to be the villain. That she didn't want to cause division. She just wanted to feel like this was her home too. I said, it is your home. But he lives here too. And he gets to bring all of himself with him. We didn't solve anything that night. There was no magical reconciliation or deep romantic moment. She just nodded, got up, and went to bed. I stayed in the living room a while longer, listening to the quiet of the house, wondering what kind of legacy I was leaving behind. What kind of man my youngest would become. What kind of father I was turning into. She said absolutely not. The words hit me like a punch I didn't see coming, though maybe I should have. We had been circling around this tension for a while, the undercurrent of unspoken frustrations bubbling to the surface. But hearing it said so plainly, so sharply, it made something inside me tighten. Our kids are American, she said firmly, her eyes steady on mine. They're going to speak English. I won't stand for your son teaching them that crap. That crap. The phrase echoed in my head, harsh and bitter. It wasn't just a rejection of a few foreign words or cultural tidbits. It felt like a dismissal of an entire history, an entire identity. The identity that I had once embraced and nurtured, even if I had stepped away from it in recent years. The identity that shaped the very bones of who I am and who my son is. I sat there, stunned, not because I disagreed with her outright, but because the weight of her conviction made me realize how far apart we really were on this. The woman I love and married, the mother of my youngest children, was firmly shutting the door on a part of me that I hadn't even realized I was still holding on to. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I wanted to desperately, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I took a deep breath and told her that I understood her position, that I wasn't trying to force anything on anyone. I said I just wished she had talked to me before she took her frustration out on my son. That it hurt to see him pushed away, especially over something so fundamental as language and heritage. She apologized. She said she hadn't meant to lash out, that she was overwhelmed. She promised that next time, if she had concerns, she would come to me first instead of confronting my son. Her tone was sincere, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find some middle ground. But even as I nodded and said thank you, a pit opened up in my stomach. The pit grew as I thought about the implications of what she said. It wasn't just about a few words here or there, it was about how she saw our kids, our family, and what she believed they should carry forward. It stung that she wanted our children to sever those ties so completely. That she saw our heritage as something to be hidden or rejected, something lesser or embarrassing, that crap, as she put it so plainly. And I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Hurt, yes, but also shame, guilt, and confusion. Had I failed my son by not standing up more forcefully? Had I abandoned my roots so thoroughly that now my wife felt justified in erasing them from our children's lives? Was I being naive, hoping for a blended family where all parts are honored, when in reality, some pieces were just incompatible? I thought back to when I first met my wife, years after my divorce, when I had already pulled away from my cultural community. I wasn't proud of it, but I had turned away from a world I felt disconnected from, tired of the weight of expectation and tradition. I was trying to build a new life, one that was simpler, more American, less complicated. She married me as that version of myself, the man who no longer spoke the language fluently, who had lost touch with the customs, who no longer felt compelled to hold tightly to the past. And in that, I suppose, there was an unspoken contract. But my oldest son was different. He was connected, even if I wasn't. He learned the language from his mother, my ex-wife, who held onto those roots fiercely. He kept those ties alive, even as I stepped back. And now, with my youngest children, I wanted to share a piece of that with them too, a thread to their heritage, a link to a past that was fading fast. I thought it was a simple wish, harmless, even beautiful. But my wife saw it differently. She saw confusion. She saw a child torn between worlds. She saw a household divided by language, by culture, by identity. And in her eyes, that was a problem she didn't want to face. I can't say I blame her entirely. I've seen the tension in her, the feeling of being excluded or alienated when the language is spoken around her, and she can't understand. She's told me before she feels left out, isolated, like a visitor in her own home. I've tried to be sensitive to that, to balance between honoring my son's heritage and respecting my wife's feelings. But maybe I failed. Maybe I didn't do enough. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone with my thoughts. I thought about my son's great-grandparents, who left everything familiar behind to start anew. I thought about my father, who carried their language and stories like a precious heirloom. I thought about how those stories are slipping away, how easily they could be lost if no one tells them. And I thought about the future. What kind of future would my sons have if they never knew where they came from? Would they feel whole? Would they feel connected? Or would they grow up with a gap in their identity, a hole where history and culture should be? I also thought about my wife, the woman I love, who has stood by me through so much, who is the mother of my youngest children, who has her own fears and insecurities. Her rejection of that crap wasn't just about language, it was about fear. Fear of exclusion, fear of division, fear of being left out. And I realize that I have to acknowledge those fears, even if I don't fully understand them. But I also realize that I can't abandon my heritage completely, not for her, not for anyone. Because it's a part of me. Because it's a part of my children. Because it's a story worth telling. I'm left trying to navigate this impossible middle ground between honoring my son's culture and honoring my wife's comfort. Between preserving history and building a home where everyone feels safe. There's no easy answer. No perfect solution. Just this fragile, tense balance. And so I sit here, wrestling with my disappointment, my hope, my love, and my fear. I want my son to have the freedom to learn about who he is. I want my wife to feel secure and included. I want my family to be whole. But right now, those desires feel like they're pulling me in different directions. And maybe for the time being, the best I can do is hold on to hope. Hope that someday, my sons will ask about their heritage. Hope that someday, my wife will understand why it matters. Hope that someday, our family will find a way to carry both worlds forward. Not perfectly, but together. Because if I've learned anything, it's that love is complicated. It's messy. It's full of contradictions. But it's also the only thing that makes all this worth it. And that's what I'm holding on to.